Hi and welcome. In today's video we're going to be looking at the Develop module of Lightroom. And this is for really improving your images, for making those corrections and getting them absolutely pristine and ready for showcasing to your clients. Okay, so let's make a start. Let me just close this up and we'll have a look at the panels. And we'll start off at this left hand side. Although if you look, I'll just go to the Library module. And you can see that the Develop module is such an important module that it's been given its own keyboard shortcut of D. D for Develop module. And it'll take you straight there from anywhere that you are. Right, over on the left hand side here, the first panel we've got is the Navigator. And this lets us see into the image when we're zoomed in. So if we click on, say, 4:1, we can then click and drag this quite easily to move around the image. Now we can do that from within the image as well, but sometimes it's easier if we can see the rest of the image too, to see where we want to drag to. But either way is fine. I'll just bring that back again. Next down we've got presets, and these are the ones. We've got some that ship with Lightroom, and you can see that we've got natural, bright, there's several that come, and we've got a hover, so if you hover over one it shows you a preview, so you don't have to click, you can just hover over them and say no, it's not one of them. What about my creative ones? Yeah, and find one that you like, and then if you see one that you like, just click on it. Okay, snapshots. Well, let's first look at history. If we look at this, we've got a history panel, and there is infinite history with Lightroom. So if you've got a image that you've had on your computer for a long time, you've done quite a lot of editing, there'll be quite a lot of history to it. And finding that one particular place that you want to go back to probably may not be easy. So if you get to a point where you think, oh, this may be an interesting place to just save this because I might want to get back to it quickly, then you can use a snapshot. And it's a little bit like having a virtual camera that takes a picture of exactly where you are in history. So if this is where we've got to and we think, well, I'd like to move on from this, but I may want to get back here really easily, then you can make a snapshot. So you can click and that gives you the snapshot name. You can type something in, but this gives you the date and the time, which is okay for me, and click create. And now this snapshot is in here. So then if we were somewhere doing something and we got to a point, let's say we got to a point like this and said, ooh, I'd like to get back to where I was, then all I need to do is go back and click on the snapshot and I'm back to where I was. And then, okay, let's close down the history and close down the snapshots. Next, we've got collections. Now, collections are a powerhouse feature of basically organising virtually your images, because you can then choose images from different folders, different hard drives if you like, and keep them in one place all next to each other, which is difficult because you would have to create a new folder. If you had a project, for instance, like Slideshow, you'd have to create a folder that's specifically for that purpose and then create copies of all your images and put them into that folder. Whereas with a collection, you don't need to do that. You can just keep them all next to each other with a collection. Now here you can see I've got what's called a collection set. If I just click the collections plus, you can see I can create a collection, a smart collection, or a collection set. And a collection set is just like a filing cabinet really, just to keep your collections in. And then we've got smart collections. And we've got some here that ship with Lightroom. Okay, we'll close that back up again. Now let's move over to the right hand side. Now here you can see the top panel is the histogram. And the histogram is really useful because it shows you where the tones are in the images, and it shows you also where tones are missing, which is this area here. We've got some blacks and dark greys, medium greys through to mid greys, but then once we get to this point there are no light or white pixels in this image whatsoever, so that's why it looks really dull. Now, if I hover over an area here and you just look at this area here where at the moment it says ISO 200, but if you just watch it, it now says exposure, and if I move over this way you get a lighter area and it says shadows, and that's blacks. And if I go that way you get highlights and whites. And if you notice, I'll just open the basic panel. That's exactly the panels that's in the basic panel. Highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. So you can either edit your image a little bit from the histogram, so you can click and drag and move that, and you'll see that the slider, that is the exposure slider in this case, is moving. And if we hover here and click, you'll see that it's the highlight slider that's moving. Now it's useful to get to know of how your histogram works, what it's actually telling you. So this is saying that it's basically underexposed because there's not enough light in it. So what we can do is get some more light in it, so we can stretch out this histogram. So we're basically taking some of the let's say the light grey pixels, and we're forcing them to white. And what that's going to do is stretch out the tonal range of the image. So let's have a go at that. So I'll start with let's say with the whites, and this is called setting the white and black point. So the black point, we need pixels to go right into that corner there. And at the white point, we need pixels to go right into that corner there. So if I want to set my white point, I can take the white slider and I can just slide it over until I get into that point there. So now I've brightened up the whole of the image. I don't want to go too far, because if I go too far I'll start clipping and it goes crazy. So just as you get to there, but you don't want any pixels going up this end, and that's fine. So we've now set the white point. Now the black point's not bad actually. I don't think we need to move that at all, because if we move it we're going to start clipping. You can see it's shooting up that left hand side. So we'll just leave it where it is there. Now texture. Now texture is it's an interesting thing. It's a bit like sharpening, but it's subtle. So I can move that, you'll see that the image will get a little bit sharper, or if I drop it this way, it gets less textury, and so it looks like it's a little bit softer. And it really is a good effect and a good slider, and it doesn't go over the top. So you can mix and match this with sharpening. Now clarity, this is your mid-tone contrast. It's one of the two contrast sliders. The first one is obviously contrast, that's your contrast slider. And the second one is clarity, which is your mid-tone contrast. And then we go down, we've got vibrance and saturation, which are both about changing and editing the colour in your images. Now texture, we can add a little bit of texture. Clarity, it's always nice to put a little bit of clarity in. Dehaze, well that's for really taking mist or haze out or adding it. So if I move it this way, it'll actually add some haze, or if I've got some haze and I move it to the right, it'll take it out. And then the vibrance slider and the saturation slider are to do with colour. Now saturation is basically, it saturates every colour. So even if it's oversaturated already, it'll oversaturate it some more. So I can make this image really nuclear. Or if I go down the other end, which is -100, it takes all the colour out. So you go black and white. Now vibrance is what's called a non-linear response. It saturates the colours that are not saturated, and it tends to try and leave alone the colours that are saturated. Now the great thing about this, and in fact I like about this, is that if I take my vibrance up, it's a more subtle effect than the saturation. If I take it down, if I take it right to the bottom here at -100, I've still got some colour in my image. I've got a very muted colour effect, and I really like that with some images. So we'll put that back to where it was. We'll leave that there. Okay. Now let's move on to the tone curve. We'll open that up. And you can see here that it's very similar in looking to the curves feature in Photoshop, that you've got a straight line, which is the curve. But there are two types of tone curve in Lightroom. And if we click this little doohickey thing down at the bottom with the dot in, we get a different type of tone curve. And this one is like the one, if you remember when you had your bike when you were a youngster, you had some safety wheels on it to stop you falling off. Well, this is in effect a little bit like that. And what you've got is some sliders that actually show you the areas in that little white envelope there where it will let you adjust to. But it only lets you adjust a certain amount. But we've got 4 areas. We've got the lights, which lets you adjust over a bigger area, and the darks, and then the shadows, which are just at this bottom end here, this bottom left hand side. The one that I prefer, if I'm honest, is the point curve. And this works just like the one in the curves in Photoshop. And you can click to put a point on, and you can start manipulating the curve. So I can raise the highlights a little bit, put another curve on, and I can depress the shadows a little bit. And I can, in doing that, I can put the classic S curve on, which is putting some contrast in. And then you actually get some custom ones. There's 3, so you can basically get the linear one, which is virtually where you were. There's medium contrast, which puts a little bit of a bend in it. And then we've got one for stronger contrast, which puts quite a bigger bend in, but most of it down at the shadow's end. Okay, that's it for the tone curve. Okay, next we've got the HSL and colour panel. And this is where you do all your refined colour corrections, because you've got access to a wide range of colours in the image that you can change. And we've got 3 panels. We've got a hue panel, which is where you can control the colour, because the hue is the colour. Blue is a hue, green is a hue, they're all colours. So we can basically spin any colour around on the colour wheel. Generally you wouldn't do this unless you were looking for some wild and wacky or creative result. Saturation is, well, how much colour have you got and how intense is it? And then luminance, well, luminance means how much black or white do you have in your actual colour. So we can, let's say, well, we've got probably some warmer tones in there. We'll try orange. We can actually spin the oranges round between like a red, deep red, and going into the greens and the yellows. But we don't want to do that. Saturation, this is really how much of a colour have you got. So if we've got something that looks a little bit dull, then we can look at, say, take the oranges and make them more saturated. Just warm it up a little bit. Or we can take it out. If we've got a little bit too much, we can specifically target those orange tones. And then the blue tones, obviously for the sky, we can make the sky bluer, make it look a little bit better. But in this case, it probably doesn't. And, well, we haven't got any purples and magentas, I don't think. It's always interesting to check, actually, just to see if you have. No, I don't think I have. Okay, and then luminance. This is how much black or white you've got in a colour. So in the blue, if I think, I could do with that being a little bit darker, that sky, then we can move the blue slider to the left, and what that will do is darken up the sky. In this case, it completely ruins the image because this is a very low-res JPEG, but you'll see what I mean. And if you've got a sky that you think is a little bit too blue, then you could make it a little bit less blue by moving the slider. And what we're doing is, if we move to the right, we're adding white to the blue mix, and if we move it to the left, we're adding black to the blue mix. So that is quite different to the saturation. Okay, moving on. We've got the split toning panel. And split toning panel is interesting for mainly black and white images. You can use it on colour, but it doesn't work as well. So let's swap to another image, and then we'll nip into the basic panel and we'll convert it black and white. And then we'll go back to split toning. Right, now on this we can add a different colour to the highlights of the image and the shadows of the image. So if I click on this highlight slider here, what I can do, I can pick a colour. So let's pick a blue colour. And that's going to add a colour blue to the whole of the highlights. Now I can decide how intense I want it by going up to the top, or I can drag this little square down to the bottom, which takes all the colour out and makes it grayscale. So I'll decide I'll put it somewhere there. And when I was doing that, all it was doing was moving this slider, the saturation slider. I can then go for the shadows and say, well, let's put a complementary colour in here. I'll put a yellow in, and it gives me like an antique-y feel. Yeah, I quite like that. And then I can decide, do I want it more saturated or less saturated? I'll go for somewhere there. So I've got a little bit of blue and I've got a little bit of yellow. And the balance slider is what it says really. It's, well, if you take it to one end, you'll go completely blue, and the other end completely brown, and then you can go anywhere in between till you find something you think, that don't look bad, that I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so we'll just turn that effect off for the minute. There we go. And we'll go back to the basic panel and we'll come back to colour again. Now you notice these little doohickeys here, these are just switches to turn on and turn off the effect. So my split toning one, if I click on that, you'll see that I'll actually get that now where it's overlaid over my colour image. I can just switch it back off again by clicking the bottom there. Right, next we've got an important one, the detail panel. So let's have a look at that. And this is where you do your noise reduction and all your sharpening. Now this is a really good panel, but we've got here a preview pane, and this preview pane is always set to 100% so that you can preview any noise or sharpening effects. But you can have 2 points. So here we can drag this around and we can get a point where we really think we'd like to assess the sharpness of the image. Let's say somewhere like that. But you can actually assess the sharpness in a different place by using the Navigator. So if I now click 1:1, I've now got the same zoom ratio. So I can now look at a different area. So I've now got a different area, but these are both now at 100%. Okay, let's have a look at some of the sliders. Now, first I'm going to do my noise reduction, but as you can see this is at ISO 100, so noise really isn't going to be a massive issue, and at 100% I can't see any. So I'll just put a little bit of that in. You can put a little bit of noise reduction in, and what that will do is just eliminate any little artifacts that may be in the sky. Right, now my important one, my sharpening. And what I'm going to do is take the sharpening slider and take it right over to 150. And you'll see that I'm now bringing out some of the detail from the sky. I'm sharpening the artifacts that's in the sky. In fact, I'm sharpening everything. And you can see that there's detail coming in through the windows now. There's quite severe halo edges. So I'm really over sharpening this image, but I'm just doing it to show you a point. Now the radius slider I very rarely change. And this slider is really showing you how thick these edges are of these boundaries. Now a really good idea is to use the Alt key. If I hold the Alt key down and I click on a slider head, on the amount slider what it does is it removes the colour. And this takes away any chance that we'll get confused by the colour, and it just gives you a very, very basic view. Now if I do the same, I'm still holding the Alt key down and I click on the radius slider. This is showing you where all those edges are. And if I move this to the other end, you'll see that those edges get really thick. And this is when you are really, really over sharpening your image. So this is why I rarely move it from about 1 or less than 1 tends to be a good amount. And then my detail slider. Well, part of the noise reduction is that it actually blurs. It adds a little bit of blur to try and blur the artifacts together a little bit. And we've got a detail slider which tries to bring some of those edges back. So if we move, I'll hold the Alt key down and click, and you can see those are the edges that the detail slider is affecting. So if I take it right over to that side, you'll see it gets a little bit more detail, so it's bringing back a little bit more of those edges that have been softened. And if I take it right the other way, it really over softens a lot of those edges. So what it's normally like is I will normally leave that in the middle. But if I've got something architectural, I'll probably take it up to maybe 60–70%. And if I've got a portrait image, and especially a lady, then I will bring it down, and that will lessen the effect of the detail. Okay, and now lastly but not leastly, we've got the masking slider, and this is the absolute pièce de résistance, really. If I hold the Alt key down now, you can see I've got a heck of a lot of sharpening. And this is going to badly affect some of the sky area on here. But now, if I click on the masking slider, you'll see the image goes completely white. I've still got my finger on the Alt key. And this, what white means is that basically everything is being sharpened. Anywhere that's white is having that sharpening applied to it. But as I move to the right, you'll get some black areas appearing. And what this means is that anywhere that's black is not now being sharpened at all. So you can move this till you get just to sharpening the contrast edges that you want. And here I'd like my tree to be a little bit sharper, and I'd like the edges, all the edges in the house and the brickwork and the stonework, to be sharper. And so I can do that, and now I've dropped out the sky from that calculation. And you can see now that I've got a nice bit of sharpening, but yet my sky at 1:1, which is what I want to view this at, is quite nice, quite smooth. But I've got no really ugly halos in there. If you have, then you can always drop the sharpening slider down a little bit if you can actually see visible halos. Okay, let's go onwards and downwards. So we'll close up the detail panel and we'll come on to lens corrections. Now let's see if we can find a better image for you to look at that. Oh, and I think we can. Here we go. We'll have a look at this one. You can see this has been taken by a wide angle lens, and there's quite a lot of distortion on. You can see there's a load of bends going on around all these posts. Now in the panel itself, we've got two little tick boxes. We can tick to remove chromatic aberration. If you don't know what that is, I'll show you in a sec. And we can enable profile correction. So there's a profile for your camera which will correct all this bendiness that you get. But let's first have a look at chromatic aberration. So first I'm going to lighten up, just so we can see it a little bit better what the problem is. I'll lighten that up, and then I'll click to go into here, and we'll go in a little bit further. Let's try 4:1. Here we go, that's much better. And you can now see the phenomenon of chromatic aberration. And it's these fringes here. Here we've got a green fringe at one side, and we've got a magenta fringe at the other side. And here we've got quite a hefty green fringe and a green fringe here. Now, what you can see on the post here, on this column, we've got green on one side, magenta on the other. And this is where the light hasn't focused correctly on the plane, on your sensor or your film. And the light splits up, so you end up with these fringes, these colour fringes. Now, you may say if you print this out at 6x4, you'd probably never notice them. But if this was an image that you thought, oh, well, I won't mind this on my wall and I'll have it at A3, there is a chance you will start to see some of these fringes appearing when you print it larger. And also, if you're doing something like HDR photography, where you're basically squishing together several different exposures, if you've got these green and magenta fringes on each image, then the software is going to throw a wobbly and it's not going to like it, and you're going to get really, really soft edges. Okay, so how can we get rid of it? Well, let's go down and have a quick look, and we'll look at the lens corrections. And it's a one tick wonder, so we just go and click in there, and if you want, let's get a really bad piece, just a minute. Just look round this area, And then if we put a tick in that remove chromatic aberrations, boom, it does a marvellous job. It doesn't get rid of it all. I would still say there's still a hint in places, but the majority of that, if you look round this column, I'll turn it on and off, it makes a phenomenal difference. There it was, gone. So that's your chromatic aberration sorted. Now if you didn't like all these bends and you wanted to try and straighten it out, you can enable the profile corrections, and this is where you can choose the profile for your camera that will straighten everything out. So if I click on that, you'll see that it's automatically gone and found that, and this is, it'll pull this data all straight out from your metadata. And you've got your make of your camera, you've got your model, and you've got your profile. And if it's still not quite right, then you've got a distortion slider where you can move it a little bit. But I think this one, at about 100, that's pretty good. And then if there's any vignetting around the edges, you could lighten that off a bit, or you can darken that off a bit. But again, on this here, I think we'll just leave it as it is. And there you can see, I think we've done a pretty good job. Just with 2 ticks, we've got rid of the chromatic aberration and we've straightened out all our verticals. Righty-ho. Next we've got transform. So let's click on that. And here we've got some options, and transforming is trying to straighten out images that don't have the right perspective. So let's find something that I can show you that with. There we go. And basically there's just, it's a one click and you've got to try them, and they either work beautifully or they fail badly. So if I say auto, you'll see it makes a stab at trying to get the verticals vertical and the horizontals horizontal. In this case, not very well. I'll try level. No, that's not really good either. I'll try vertical. And that's, well, yeah, that's done a better job, a little bit job. And what you can see it's done is it's dragged in the image and it's squished it in to try and get these vertical, these edges vertical, but it's not done a lot for the horizontal. But then this may just absolutely be what you're after. And then finally, we've got full, and what full does is like a 3D transform on it. And again, this either works really well or not at all. I'll click on full. Well, actually, it's not done a bad job. That it's made a good stab at getting these verticals vertical, and it's also had a good stab at making the horizontals work. Okay, right. Another one is called guided edit, and this is the guided one. And we've got a little symbol here for the tool. So if I go on to guided edit, you'll see that I've now got like a little viewing area and a cross. And what I'm trying to do here is identify an edge that should be vertical. So, and this little viewer allows you to find that more accurately. So I can click and drag and I get this. I've still got my finger on the mouse. I've got now a line, and I can try and line that up with an edge. So I'll go there. Now nothing happens on the first one, and this is the first of 4 lines that I've got. So again, I'll get on that edge, click and drag down and leave it there. And you'll see that'll straighten up the verticals. Now I've got 2 horizontal lines I can use. So I'll go in there and drag it out to there. And that straightens that up, and I'll try another one which is along this bottom concrete plinth. You don't have to use all 4 lines. If 3 lines does it for you, that's fine. And then we'll see that the horizontals are horizontal and the verticals are fairly vertical now. You can change these. If you get it wrong, you can click and drag it and put it back to where you think it should be. And there we go. We've now got perfect horizontals and perfect verticals. Okay, let's just return that tool to the dock and we'll click off. Next one down, we've got the effects panel. And the effects panel is basically around, we can add some grain So if you wanted your image to look a bit grittier or a little bit older, and you can add some grain. Or we can use post-crop vignetting, and that's pretty good. So I can darken down the edges if I think I just want to hide a bit of detail or give it a little bit of oomph. Or I can go the other way and have a lighter vignette. And you can control the midpoint and the roundness. Now what I normally do, because it's difficult to see sometimes the effect of the vignette, so what I will do is I'll take all the feather off and then I'll play around with my midpoint. And then I can play around with the roundness and I can get my vignette exactly as I want it, and then I put the feather back on again. There we go. And then the calibration panel, lastly but not leastly, this is where we're actually really calibrating the colours. It's not something that you really need to do, but what it's doing is it's calibrating exactly what Lightroom sees as each of these individual colours, these primary colours. The main thing in here is to look at the process version, because sometimes you can get into a panic situation. This is the process version 5 now. This is how Lightroom is interpreting the image data and processing it in Lightroom today, the latest one. And you'll see that if we go to the basic panel, we've got all the sliders that you've got in Camera Raw, exactly the same. Right, that's cool. But if you get an image that's been processed in a previous version of Lightroom, then those sliders might be different. So let's say go back to version 1. If I now go back to my basic panel, you'll see that now my sliders have changed. I've got an exposure, I've got recovery, I've got fill light, and I've got blacks, because these are the sliders that were in Lightroom at the time of process version 1. Just a little FYI, if you ever get this, you think, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Then all you've got to do is go down to your calibration panel and swap it back to the current version. And then when you go, you'll see that all your sliders are back as they should be. A couple of other things while we're here. Here you can see under tone, we've got a little tone button, and we've got an auto button. So there are cases when auto can be pretty good. Let's just find an image, see if we'll try this one. And it's a good place to start, basically. Sometimes it doesn't do a good job, but so we'll just try it on this one. Yeah, it's lightened it up a little bit. It's not done a great job, but it does give you a starting point. Now if you get to a point where you've got a load of sliders you've pulled and you think, oh, no, I'm not going in the right direction, I'd rather just go back to the start. Instead of pulling each individual slider, if you hold the Alt key down, it changes, that tone changes to reset tone, and presence changes to reset presence. So I can click to reset all the tone sliders to 0 and then click to reset all the presence sliders to 0. Finally, we're looking at profiles here. Now profiles used to be hidden away, but they've really come to the forefront, and because of that they've now been promoted right to the top of the basic panel. So what is a profile? Well, if you shoot in RAW, what happens is that RAW image isn't really an image, it's just data. It's zeros and ones that come from your sensor. Now what it needs is converting into an image. And to do that, it needs what's called a profile. This is like a converter for your image data. Now Adobe used to have one called Adobe Standard. And this one was there for something like 10 years. But things have changed over the last 10 years on how we actually process our images. So now they've replaced it recently with what's called colour. So this is the standard way that your images from RAW are rendered. But they've also added some more. And here we've got a profile browser. And so here we can look now, we've got the basic ones, which is colour and monochrome. And we've now got some artistic ones. So I can go through these and say, well, do I want that one or that one? And you can actually hover over and it'll show you as well. And if we go further down, we've quite a lot of interesting black and white renditions. And then we've got some modern ones. And then right down at the bottom, we've got some vintage ones, all giving you a different colour look to your image. Now, sometimes there is a little bit of misconception that profiles are actually like presets, and they're not. Now, a preset is a recording of the positions of all the sliders in the develop module. And so you can apply it at one click, but it does move all the sliders. And now if you want to add a different preset, what it does is it basically removes all the sliders from the first preset and adds the sliders from the second preset. So you can't like multi-stack things. Profiles do not affect the sliders. So if you put a profile on, I'll just show you, we've put on Artistic 2. If I close the profile browser, you'll see that it's not made any difference. It's changed the colours, but it's not made any difference to the sliders. So now we can add a preset on top of that. Or you can add your presets and then add one of these on right at the end, just to give your image a final look, a final colour. And while you're in here, what you've got now is an amount slider. So we can actually, if you've got something that you like, you can say, well, it's just not quite enough. You can boost it, or you can take it off a little bit. Are they not cool? I think they are pretty good. And you can actually make your own profiles and add them into both Photoshop and to Lightroom. Okay, that's it for our look at the panels in the Develop module. I hope you found it useful. If it was, please give me a thumbs up or leave me a comment in the More area under the video. And please click that subscribe button to join together with my Photoshop and Lightroom learning community. And it also helps live link training to go higher in the rankings and reach more users of Photoshop and Lightroom. I'll see you in the very next video. Bye for now.